Hello, folks. So in this video, I wanted to tell that code is the best documentation that you can find, be it anything, anywhere, whatever it is, right? Code is the best documentation, and that is why a lot of people love open source software. I think you can actually see the code, and you can actually understand what is the behavior, how the thing works, and if something is not documented, you can just go read the code, right? And I mean, at least even if you don't have access to the exact service, right? Let's say there is a front end and back end, and or if there is a, say, the front end is, say, some command line interface, and the back end is actually some API with some closed source API implementation, right? You can still see the source code of the command line interface code if it is open source, and try to understand how that works in case you don't know how to provide the inputs in some particular way or in some particular manner, and it's not documented well. Then you can actually at least see the source code of the command line interface, assuming the backend API implementation only is closed source, which is the case for a lot of SaaS services out there, right? But then they provide libraries and command line interfaces and web console and whatnot. Usually the libraries, the SDKs, the software development kits, and the command line interfaces are all open source. You can still see the source code of that to understand how to actually use the command line interface, the tool, the CLI tool, the library, the SDK, and stuff like that, right? And even for the API, you can at least see the API specification, the open API spec or whatever kind of spec they have, say Swagger or something like that. Now actually Swagger only has transformed into Open API standard. I think Swagger 3 became Open API 2, I'm not sure, or Open API 3, I can't remember. But so you can actually go check out the spec and understand the documentation from that, and the any source code generated from that. You can see that to understand how things work, right? Even though you may not have access to the backend implementation itself, which you'll need to understand the behavior and how the input is modified or processed and whatnot. But as much as possible, whenever code is available, and if it's not documented well or if it's not documented properly, or you are not able to find the documentation, you can still find out the source code, which is usually easily you can find it. It's easy to find it, so easily accessible, and you can just go ahead and understand how it works. So I believe code is the best documentation, and if you have access to all the source code for all the parts of the system that you're working with, then nothing like that. You can just go ahead and read it and understand it, even though you can't, like, let's say, use it for commercial reasons or something or whatever. At least you can understand how it works, and you may not be able to, say, copy it or whatever for whatever reasons, let's say it's license or whatever, or may not be able to do many things, multiple things, but you can still read the code and understand how things work, and you can learn from it also. So open source code and code being documentation is kind of the thing that I always go for. Like, code is the best documentation according to me, so I would always recommend people to always consider code being the best documentation, because based on code only people write documentation in terms of like English or whatever language, written and spoken language that they want to make their content in and documentation in. But code is the ultimate source of truth. It's harder to read the code, yes, it depends. Usually it's harder, that's why people write documentation, but then code is the source of truth. It's possible to make mistakes in documentation, but nothing talks the truth like code. If something says ABC in, say, code, and something says EFG in documentation, well, ABC is the truth. You're either seeing the wrong documentation or the documentation is wrong. Wrong documentation is in the sense that wrong version or whatever, right? Or wrong thing or whatever. Or the documentation is not written properly for some reason, some issue, or it's not been updated or whatever, but source code is the truth. So I would say code is the best documentation. So if you are using some software, just understand which version you're using and then find out the source code for it, and find out the exact version, that exact version source code, and go ahead and look for the code and learn from that. So yeah, that's all I had for this video, talking about how code is the best documentation. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.